Hi, thank you for joining us today for Integrative Lawyers of the World, where we believe lawyers contribute to the healing of the world. We believe this because we know lawyers who are doing just this. Hi, I'm Carrie, your host of Integrative Lawyers of the World podcast, and our guest this episode is Raphael Masesa. He is in South Africa, and he teaches integrative law and Indigenous law. His background is fascinating. I think you will enjoy his journey into integrative law with us. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Raphael. How are you today?
I'm all right, Harry. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for joining us today. Um, as I said in your intro, I'm very fascinated about your journey into integrative law to actually teaching an integrative law class. Can you share a little bit of your journey with us?
Yes, quite a privilege actually, the journey for myself. And I've said this previously that the privilege comes from a little bit earlier background of my life,
Yeah.
where I actually pursued Kerry to in a Catholic church to actually become a priest. Now, obviously, I'm not a priest. I never achieved that. That's one element. The other element and the privilege, I think, comes from my teaching of Indigenous law for many years. And I was asked by a former student, in fact, recommended that the person who can teach integrative law, when they looked at the syllabus, what my name was mentioned. So a supervisor approached me and said, Raphael, your name has come up. And it was quite interesting. So when I looked at the syllabus and the content and the reader that was prepared by Professor Kim Wright, I started immediately, um, you know, realizing the similarities of integrative law content with actually Indigenous law in many areas. So I taught last year was my first time I taught. We so what Vast College has done, where I'm actually teaching as an institution, we have campuses in Cape Town and other 8 campuses across the country, is that integrative law is taught as an elective for law degree students in the 4th year. So these are students that are just in the final year to actually graduate, and then they are introduced to Indigenous law. They are fascinated about it. And last year and this year, the numbers actually increased tremendously. Yeah.
And so last year was the first year teaching it, and then this year you're teaching it again, but it's even more people signed up for it.
My advantage around teaching law students is that I also teach other modules. For example, I teach constitutional law. I teach many other modules. What I did last year, especially when I taught integrative law, was I started now, using some of the content in these other modules, and I started and that's integrating that into constitutional law, for example, South African constitutional law, and other like labor law and so on and so forth. So students started hearing about this in many ways, not only from these students, but other students as well. And the interest started spreading across. So that's why the number increased actually tremendously to this year. And I'm actually seeing that to be actually growing up next year and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Now, some of our listeners may not be familiar with integrative law. What are some of the things you teach in your integrative law module?
Yes. So the content is quite a lot. So it's a semester module. That's what we have actually established here at Vast College. But the content is quite a lot. So what we do is, first of all, just talk about integrative law in terms of different models that are there, different names that are associated with it, and then we introduce, aspects of integrative law. For example, we may be talking about one particular model. So we may be talking about, for example, conscious contract as a content of a unit. What Varsity College does is that, in every module, it divides the content of teaching per unit. It's called learning unit. So this integrative law has 8 learning units. I can tell you, Kerry, we don't even finish that content. You can't. It's just a lot of it.
Yeah.
So it's divided into 8. The reader was prepared by Professor Kim Wright. This year, what we did, last year it was close to 700 pages. We we have reduced that to about 250 pages,
Okay.
which is very, very good and doesn't intimidate. It's not removing things. Just I think the way it was written now it is narrowed down. So, but still, it's 8 learning units, and then in those 8 learning units, introduction to integrative law, talking about different names towards that, different approaches. Then we go into talking about each particular model. So we can talk about collaborative law as a unit. We can talk about, social contracts as a unit. We can talk about eighth jurisprudence as a unit, different compartments in that as well. I'm not sure whether I've actually defined integrative law, but I think that will definitely be talked about as we go on.
How would you define integrative law?
From the content point of view, we can talk about a model, we can talk about a movement. But I have interacted with Professor Kim Wright, and I said, I think integrative law is a system, just like any legal system, part and parcel of human beings. But with integrative law, it is, and I'm speaking from Indigenous point of view, is that it has a social aspect of it, it has a legal aspect of it, it has a religious aspect of it, spiritual aspect, not religious, spiritual aspect of it. So it is more like a way of life of a legal practitioner, of a lawyer, or anybody who's actually doing that practice, in the sense that the way we are relating, like you and I, we just didn't just begin. We said, hello, how are you? We created a relationship. So integrative law is just about that. It's about those relationships. How do we manage them? How do we manage conflicts? How do we manage harmony, for example? How do we live together, in different aspects of life anyway.
I like to ask every guest this because the answers are a little bit different, but they're all united in their core values, and I think that's what part of integrative law is that you're integrating all parts of yourself into your practice. And so, of course, everyone's approach to it may be a little different because we all are different, but it's grounded in that the core values and the movement of, I liked how what you said, being recognizing our differences, but including our differences, not excluding, transcending, including, and how do we do that and relate to one another?
So yes, Kerry, and this is I think where my passion comes from, as far as Indigenous law is concerned. And I tend to challenge the students of integrative law to start thinking like that. Well, with Indigenous law, it's not something that, at a later stage of my life, then Indigenous law was introduced to me. That is not how it happened. I was born into the system of Indigenous law. I was born into the aspect of Indigenous law. I was given a name. Okay, so the name has meaning. Where I was born, how I was born, my umbilical cord, where it was buried, all those things. Other people might think that is cultural, But that's part of indigenous law. That is a system, you see. So my name, Raphael, in fact, is not even an indigenous name. My indigenous name is Chsubo, which has a meaning. It means anointing, actually. So it has a meaning within a family. It has a meaning within a community where I was actually born. So that's the moment I was actually, born. I was introduced to the system, and the way of life was being introduced to me. How to speak to elderly people, how to behave around people, how to behave with your family, how to, you know, uh, make the name Masesa, known as a good name, as a good family. So all those things, how how to what to do and what not to do, was introduced at a very early age. All right. So yes. Karen.
When did you take on the name Raphael, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in the Catholic Church, the at baptism,
Hmm.
that is exactly what it was. I think it's changing now. I haven't followed that theology now at the moment, but in our time in 70s, 60s, earlier 70s, 80s, if you're going to baptize a young child, a baby, you see, the church was they need to give what they call a Christian name, not an indigenous name. Okay, I think that has now changed a little bit. I think the church has realized, I think there was a mistake,
Yeah.
but we are not going to get into those kind of things. Yeah. So
Well, I just find I was raised Catholic as well, and so I'm thinking, you have your baptism and your confirmation, and when you take on our confirmation is a little, baptism is when you're, right after you're born or shortly thereafter.
yes,
Confirmation will be in your teens.
that's
For
correct.
me, it was in my teens, and so at that point, you choose a name yourself as your confirmation name, and I think that certainly had to be a Christian name or typically after a saint. But I don't think my name is Carrie. I don't think
Yes,
that's a Christian name, but I do have a middle name, Anne, so there's a Saint Anne. I guess
yes.
all this meandering about is I'm wondering, did the Catholic Church adopt practices as part of colonialism? Did they have that requirement in African countries or other countries, but they didn't necessarily have it in America or European countries? I
Good
don't know.
question.
Yeah.
Good question. No, they did. They did very much. So a lot of, in fact, it was just a practice to say that anyone who is born of a Catholic family, in that family, they were supposed to be baptized with a Christian name. They use the term Christian name. But later on, theologians, I think African theologians started challenging that,
Mhm.
and the question was, how did these saints, Saint Anne, Saint Raphael, become saints? Where did they get these names from? So I think that came a challenge, and I think this is exactly what we're talking about, Kerry, to say indigenous law challenges these things. I think we are waking up from our some sort of slumber, if I can put it, and say, listen, this is a system that this is a good system. It works for us. It was looked upon as informal, as background, as primitive.
Mhm.
But now, and this is what I was talking to professor about it when I was being introduced to this particular module. I said the the content that I was reading is in fact what I teach. And you will see some of the things that I'm talking about, Kerry. The content is actually live in indigenous law as similar to integrative law. Yeah. So yes, it was a colonial practice that
Yeah.
was, but in a Christian sense, it didn't look like that. But yes, it was.
Even in the Christian religion, we are all children of God. So why wouldn't every child's name be a Christian name? Regard
That is
what is a Christian name? Every child's a child of God, so that child's name should be a Christian name.
because in indigenous names, always come with a meaning. There's always a meaning to giving a child name. It could be a circumstances that they are born into. Sometimes the names are not really good names, and people tend to realize later on and they change those names because they have this bad connotation towards that name. But name giving in Indigenous law is very, very critical. There's always a meaning, you see, and those meanings in most cases are very, very good meaning. Like my name, Chsubo, is anointing, person who anoints and blessing other people, so there are always those kind of
Yeah.
things that come along. Yes.
Growing up, did you like with your family, did you go by your born name? And with others, did you go by Raphael? Or after your baptism, were you Raphael all the time to all people?
Good question, actually. My family never calls me Raphael, in fact. And those that are close to my family, they never called me Raphael. I think usually it's in schools and in a seminary and work related, for example, here, they prefer Raphael than Chsubo. I want, when a person calls me Chsubo, I really feel at home with that name. I feel
Yeah.
it pierces myself. It goes into my being as this is Raphael. Remember, it's a name that was given when the
Yeah.
umbilical cord was actually being cut. And there's always that traditional cutting of umbilical cord to say that this is your name of the umbilical cord, meaning when they're cutting that umbilical cord. In our culture, that's how we say it. So it carries a lot of meaning in terms
Yeah.
of who I am, actually. Yeah.
Shakespeare, like, what is in a name, right? Does a name matter? But when you're in a situation or in the setting where you're called Raphael, do you put on a different hat or not a different persona? You're still you, but is it just a little different than when you're in the setting where you're called
Chisubo.
Chisuo?
The
Oh,
B is silent, Chisubo. Yeah.
Chisuo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chisuo.
We are taking a brief break from this conversation to ask for your financial support. With each episode, we hope you can see how lawyers and peacemakers like you are contributing to the healing of the world. It takes many kinds of resources for the integrative law movement to keep going and affecting change. Your monetary donation can help us continue this important work by supporting the activities and the members of this community. Each contribution goes to promote the stability and accessibility of the movement and to support basic expenses like our Mighty Network group, web hosting, social media and event management, and this Integrative Lawyers of the World podcast. Because we like to give people choices, we have ongoing monthly options to match your budget, or you can make a one-time donation. Thanks to our non-profit corporate sponsor, the Renaissance Law Society, US supporters are able to make tax-deductible donations. Supporters from other countries, please check your local tax laws. For ways to support the integrative law movement and our world-changing work, go to our website at www.integrativelaw.com and click on Support the Movement tab at the top of the page. Another great way to support us is to rate us 5 stars and comment, like, follow, or subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, Google, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. These ratings and interactions help us get seen and heard by even more people to make an even stronger impact. Thank you for your support and spending time with us today. Enjoy the rest of this conversation.
Is it fair, but is something where I just have one name in all situations and all circumstances. I'm integrated that by myself. But when you start having two names for yourself, one for here, one for there, does that just make life a little bit more
Complicated.
separate you into different parts? And is that fair to place that on someone?
It's not. I think that's where now the change came from the theologians who said, no, we can't have that now, and these things are changing. So in situation, I think now that this particular age. At one time, those like separations were quite clear. And in some cases, not particularly myself, in some cases, I know people within our community that really don't even want to be using that kind of English name because it's not, they don't want to be. Because they don't feel they feel that it's foreign. I actually use that word. It's foreign. It's other name that does not necessarily belong to them. In some culture, they were very strong. So the Catholic Church managed that, but in other denominations, they managed to keep the indigenous way. Remember, indigenous communities, they also have their own indigenous religion. All right. So in that aspect, obviously, they would keep their names. In some cultures, they don't actually have any Christian names, and they have only those names that are indigenous to them. So yes, at one time you start feeling as this is not my name. In my case, I embraced it because of the meaning. So once I discovered the meaning, I said, okay, this is good. It was an angel. It's an angel. And the meaning of it has quite a profound one, something to do with healing, God's healing, and so on and so forth. So I embraced that, and I said, okay, I'll take that. So that's what happens in many cases where the meaning becomes important, and you can embrace that together with the indigenous name. People do those kind of embracing. Yeah.
And your two names go well together, anointed and healing.
That is correct. That is correct. So this is quite important what we're talking about already, because with integrative law, I think even when I started teaching last year, it looked as if we are starting, but I needed to go back a little bit with the students and say, go back to your family, go back to where you're coming from, and let's start from there. You understand what I'm saying? Because we can't jump all these years and then forget about them. We can't forget all these aspects of a person and then forget about them. So yes, meaning in terms of names, I was asking them what their names mean and of their family kind of heritage, ancestry. That is part of integrative from my perspective. That is where we actually gotten off last year, and obviously this year it was even more to that. So yeah, so the name, every time I say Carrie, there's a force behind that name, behind me calling that. I'm actually pronouncing, words are powerful. I'm pronouncing certain things on your life when I call you by name. So even as practitioners, we should know, our people that we're dealing with. I know the students by names, because for me that is the first thing that I have to know is their names, to know a little bit about where they come from. You'll be amazed some of the things that come along. A student lost last year. A student lost a father. The way I reached to him, it was like he was part of my family. So, but this is part of indigenous law. We create a big family with the students because of all these aspects that we bring in indigenous law, just to know their backgrounds, to know their names, to know their ancestry, to know where they come from, which is quite important. Yeah.
As you're talking about knowing where you came from helps you to go where you want to go.
That is powerful, Kerry. That's very, very powerful. So you said you have Irish
Ancestry, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. No, the reason I'm quite interested about the Irish, these were the priests, missionaries when I was in the seminary. I was a Franciscan, by the way.
Oh,
So that
Franciscan, yeah.
yeah, a Capuchin Franciscan, in fact. So most of the missionaries came from Ireland. And every time I hear about Ireland, it just brings a lot of memories. I never went there because time wasn't allowing, because I didn't finish. But
Yeah.
usually when you become a priest, the first thing you have to go is to go to Dublin.
You had mentioned that your Catholic upbringing and your Indigenous law and your Indigenous background helped influence you toward the integrative law movement. We talked a little bit about the Indigenous part. What was it about the Catholic part?
I think the Catholic, the one thing that they emphasize, is we know that is the right from the childhood is catechism. So catechism, right when you're a young person, you learn a little bit about everything, about the doctrine, about all these kind of things, faith, and so on and so forth. But for me now, it went deeper because remember, I went into wanting to become a priest, and I joined the Franciscans. Now, St. Francis, I don't know how much you know about St. Francis. St. Francis is one of the, saints in Catholic Church that really brought down the church from this hierarchical kind of setup to these just ordinary brothers. In fact, he didn't even want to call priests as priests because he said this priest gives you kind of status that you look more important. We are all brothers. So, and then he loved nature. I think you know about that. So there's a lot of aspect for me and the spirituality of the Franciscans that I related myself to in terms of her loving nature, love just to be one with nature. He called Mother Earth, Brother Sun, Sister Moon, all those kind of things. Was for 9 years. I spent 9 years. I finished high school and I spent 9 years into the seminary. It was again another way of life.
I think he's the patron saint of animals and love of nature, but I didn't. I will read more on how he called like Earth, what did you say, Mother Earth, Brother Sun, Brother. That to me is um, a beautiful connection to our Earth and our environment, which is another component of integrative law, is that it's not just our practice, it's integrating the interconnectedness between us and other people, but also the interconnectedness between us and nature. So we will see a lot of integrative lawyers also being environmental lawyers. It's a natural, it's a natural, what word comes after? What word? I'm looking for a word. It's a natural extension of integrative law or
Yeah,
integrative law.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Good. Do you okay with that? Now we done with the seminary Catholic Church. What?
If anyone's interested in finding about more, to read up more on integrative law, are your course materials or reading materials, are they listed anywhere where someone could go find out more about them?
Yes. So our model of teaching is integrative teaching, if I may use that word. So the content, we've got the reader, which has a lot of content, but we also the module itself is also online. So most of the content is online. You click on the module, you go to Learn Unit 1, and you find all these links. A lot of active learning for them. A lot of it, yes. So they would have a lot of resources across the world, and also within a country, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, if there are professors out there that would like to teach integrative law in their law schools, could they reach out to you and talk to you about it?
Yeah. So what already, and I think the question on the kind of projects that we're going to be working on, the question is going to come later. So already just before the retreat, I should mention, Kerry, and I should have mentioned that um, I am not South African. Okay, if you know the African continent, I come from Zambia. So, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because we have had meetings with Professor when she was here, and another Professor Evans Kalula, and other professors from Zambia who want to introduce integrative law in Zambia. In fact, Professor Kim Wright went to Zambia to present something there already anyway. So there's a project which we are calling a Zambian project. I'm part of that team to actually work around that. But even when we were at the retreat, we had some professors from other universities that have now shown interest, and because I'm teaching, they're saying we want to introduce this in our universities. Yeah, so there are quite a number of them. There's some resistance in some circles, but as you know, I think yourself, is that you meet some resistance, but with in our language, in our culture, we say that when that when you are beating the drum on the same place repeatedly, you create a hole. You understand? So beating the drum repeatedly on the same place for us as individual lawyers is to repeat the same message over and over to these institutions until they allow us to go into these institutions. But there are some institutions that have actually embraced.
Where do you think, what's the nature of the resistance?
Good question, because the nature of resistance is because the system. Remember that the legal system is something that was just like the Catholic Church brought the doctrine and so on and so forth. The colonial governments and regimes, they also introduced their own legal systems of common law, of Western law, into most of these African countries. So part of this legal practice that happened in South Africa, in most of these countries, including Zambia, is the Western kind of legal practice. And that is the one that is taught in institutions like universities. You see, it's to teach you to become a lawyer, and you go and practice and you win cases. So they have established themselves as faculties that teach law to law students that become legal practitioners in that traditional sense, and not necessarily in the integrative law sense.
Part of that resistance is, oh, you're trying to replace me, or you're trying to replace the way that I do things. And one of our other guests, he framed it as, no, it's to transcend and include, transcend and include. As you learn more, it's not that you say you can never, like litigation, for some cases, that may be the best thing for it. So it's never to say litigation is forever excluded. It's to, okay, what else can I add to my tool set to help my clients, and then include, right? Include and transcend, include and transcend. And I like that. I think he explained it a little better than I did. I should try to find a clip of it. but the idea of it is, because I think people get, oh, you're going to make me obsolete, or you're going to make what I'm doing, what I spent the years of my life focusing on, you're now saying it doesn't have meaning. That's hard for someone to hear. It'd be hard for me to hear. So I guess I get where resistance may come from.
Probably a term of trying to reawaken the self in most of these lawyers. I think sometimes we separate ourselves from what we do, and then we become so exhausted, and then it impacts on us. So what we are saying is that you are also a human being. We're all human beings. And so how then do we work as human beings in terms of resolving these conflicts that are embroidered, that are surrounding us, without breaking down, and so on and so forth. Because remember, integrative law, and I always say this, is first, and I should mention this, because if Professor Kim Wright did not listen to this point, she was going, why didn't you repeat that point? Here is a point. So from the time when I was invited to teach integrative law to the time when, so between accepting and beginning to teach, there was a process within myself, Kerry, of reflection, thinking, reflection, thinking. And it really challenged me to think about myself a lot and started internalizing certain things that I may not have thought about it or may have taken for granted. And I think this is what lawyers sometimes lack, is they don't have time to think about what they do so that they, I mean, I can talk about values.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Constitution of South Africa is a good constitution, is one of the best in the world. But is that internalized in some of these legal practitioners? Maybe not. Maybe they are very good at whatever practice, but they don't actually make them personal so that I can relate using these values, I can relate to other people as well. So there is that aspect of self sometimes, and we have to look at that.
When you had those moments in that time of self-reflection, what did that give you? What did you learn from it? What did you take away from that?
Yes, so I'll take one amongst the many things. So there is this aspect, and which I'm going to really try to work on it with some people. I think I'll talk about them later on. So there is this aspect, and I don't know whether you've heard about, but I think you have, the concept of Ubuntu.
Yes, but go ahead and describe that for us, please.
Obviously, when the colonizers came, they were saying, well, indigenous people, they don't have individuals. They only have collective, communal kind of life. They were actually very, very wrong. So when I was thinking about one aspect, but I am actually an individual, but my individuality cannot be without the other person. It can only be complete by the other person. So Ubuntu has that element. So I was like, this is quite powerful,
That is powerful.
and it is powerful. And that's the aspect I want to actually work on as a project, just to look at the questioning that you had. So Eric has, I think Eric, he came for retreat from America. I've forgotten his surname, but he has Ubuntuworks Project. I say I want to work on that one.
Okay.
And I want to bring that aspect of Ubuntu from indigenous perspective, from my reflection, to actually develop that, Kerry. That was very powerful for me when I was reflecting. I said, no, the aspect of the individual in terms of Ubuntu, it's very key for the other people, the other persons to complete ourselves in many areas. Yes.
That is such a profound insight and something that is very meaningful for, I think, what the world, has faced with COVID, because it has tested in different parts your individual rights or your individual needs enmesh with the collective. So it really gave us an opportunity to look, where is that balance? Yes, we're individuals, but I loved how you said it. We are individuals, but I cannot be the fullest individual without the collective. And it's also interesting that you brought this up. Just this past weekend, a friend of mine, she works in peace building, in peace building and in human rights, that in some of the countries where there's the collective, the existing terminology used for human rights doesn't quite mesh, because they see it as the collective good, not the individual human right. So how do you approach the ideas behind human rights?
So we do have these universal human rights, these universal fundamental human rights that in most of these countries are embraced. And in most of these countries, countries like in Africa, that is, they actually incorporate these things in their constitutions, which is fine. The problem is those conflicts, they do actually come in, because the collective essence of what these communities are made up of is almost overlooked. When I started teaching indigenous law, I was mentored by a professor. He's passed on now, Professor Francois de Villiers. He was very, very good. So he wrote something about fundamental rights that may have been missed and not necessarily included in terms of the Constitution. So he started, putting together some of the rights that are indigenous that may actually be included and that could actually make a difference. Okay, so for example, a right to belong. Now, Ubuntu, obviously, we talked about Ubuntu, but family is quite an essence within indigenous communities. So he was saying, why then don't we have certain rights that bring an aspect of a person has a right to belong to a family, to have a family name, to have all these kind of aspects. Yes, there is that element of, in most of African countries, a bit of a tension between these rights that are individualistic in nature, of emphasizing individual rights, and somehow, to some extent, not emphasizing the communal collective part of these rights.
An example of such thing was the right to belong.
The right to belong, to have a family name, the emphasis of, even myself as Raphael, as Chsubo, I'm not just a Masesa. I'm also a son to other families that are within the community that I live in. So I cannot necessarily feel isolated. That's what I'm saying. I must feel if I don't feel belonging to my family, then I also have to feel I belong to someone else. So there's always that taking care of someone, even if they don't have someone to look after them. There are some changes because of obviously changes in terms of aspects of social, economic changes, and so on and so forth. But that aspect is still quite strong amongst indigenous people. So those are rights that I think we should also include, to say, well, you have a right to belong at least to a family, to a community. You have a name and all those kind of things, as an example.
What does being an integrative lawyer mean to you?
What I've realized, Kerry, is that as a human being, you develop, I think, to be a better person for myself and obviously within the environment that I live. But with integrative law, what it means then, it means that, there are certain things I can avoid, um, you know, that if I do something, it will lead to conflict. Yesterday, by the way, I did what? I think I was in the middle of something, then the phone call rang, and then my wife just gave me the phone and said, answer this. But I didn't know what it was about, and then I realized it was something about the telephone itself. So then I wasn't happy about it. But so I think I raised the voice. But at the end of the day, I said, no, I should not have raised the voice. So I talked to her. So it's those kind of things for me, Kerry, that are now conscious of, that, as I'm not just, a lecturer, I'm an integrative law lecturer. I'm an integrative lawyer. I have to live by practicing things that I teach. So that becomes a key thing. So integrative role means that it is building my character in many, many ways. I share this at a retreat. I say that character is very important for an individual who then belongs to the community. So that's how individual works, because you are required to obviously have those kind of characters. So it means it is impacting on my life, impacting on the way I live, my character. It is very important for me. Yeah.
It can apply whether you're a tax lawyer, a business lawyer, a civil litigator, a family law lawyer, whatever practice, or a government lawyer, whatever practice area you go into, the integrative law module can help give you a foundation or a frame of
Yeah.
reference to help you be your best in your chosen field.
That is correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
That is good.
You summarize it better than I do. Right. Right. Yeah.
And then we had talked briefly about, you had mentioned a retreat, and that was a retreat as part of the integrative law movement. that was recently in South Africa. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
When you were talking about this, you said it was a very unique retreat, and how you explained it shows to me it embodies some of the core values that we talk about with integrative law. So how was it unique for you?
Yes. So the retreat was something unexpected. When I was going there, in fact, the institution paid for everything. That's how seriously we took this retreat. They paid for everything. And my expectation was that, oh, here's a conference, we'll start just by keynote speaker and so on and so forth. Well, it didn't. The very first thing that we were invited to do was to just be conscious of the environment. That was very powerfully in a spiritual way. That we're not alone here. We may be 20, 25 people, but there are other beings, spiritual beings that actually might be part and parcel of that. That's how it started, and we were taught to reflect, to just there were some seeds that were given to us as symbols of symbolizing some life. They were given salt, also symbolized a lot of symbols there. We had a candle in the middle of we're sitting in a circle, by the way. We're not sitting like some behind anybody. So it was in a circle. So we were all equal. That part I think was quite phenomenal. And then we went through a lot of things, a lot of reflections, a lot of just presentations. Now you start feeling, oh, this is not just, this is worldwide movement, if I can put it like that. This is we just connected and so on and so forth.
Well, I'm glad that you went and that it was a meaningful experience for you.
Giving an opportunity to teach integrative law, for me, it is just an honor, privilege. Having met Professor Kim I can't even describe that, because we have just connected. She told me these words, I'm going to repeat them here, that one of the best things that have happened in her visiting South Africa is to have met me. Now, that sunk into me a lot, and even now it is just overwhelming to hear that.
So I was just going to ask you, you're very clear on what you want to do. What is it? Go ahead, declare it here.
So there's a textbook that I've been asked to work on. It's an integrative law textbook that has to go to Zambia. There's also an Indigenous law textbook that I need to work on also, but also the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth in South Africa as an university, they also want to collaborate with me to develop a module. I'm glad to do that as well.
Thank you so much for being part of Integrative Lawyers of the World. If anyone is interested in creating a integrative law module for their schools, they can contact J. Kim Wright or Raphael. We will have your contact information on our website. And thank you for being part of our conversation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it very, very much.